If we can, thank you. Welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-22. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Natalie Ward and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolios of sport, multiculturalism, seniors and veterans. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from the Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness, according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via video conference. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone appearing remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? And finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Ward, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament.
Thank you, Chair.
I also would like to remind the following witnesses that you do not need to be sworn, as you have been sworn at an earlier budget estimates hearing before this committee, and that's Ms Catherine D'Alio, Acting Secretary, Department of Communities and Justice. For all other witnesses, I ask that each in turn state your full name, position, title and agency, swear either an oath or an affirmation. The words of both the oath and the affirmation are on cards on the table in front of you. Please begin with my first witness on my left, Mr Laposta.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to take the oath. My name is Joseph Laposta and I'm the Chief Executive of Multicultural New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Ms Jones?
Thank you, Chair. My name's Karen Jones. I'm the Chief
Maybe just talk into the mic a bit.
Sorry.
Pull it towards you.
It's on now.
Yeah, they're voice activated.
Thank you. Yes, Chair, my name's Karen Jones. I'm the Chief Executive at the Office of Sport. I'll take an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Who's next? Ms McCannis? She can't hear us.
I think it's McInnes. Caroline?
Ms McCannis?
I just advised the committee, Ms. McInnes has texted me to say she can't hear anything.
No, obviously not. All right. We'll just, Mr Draper.
Thank you, Chair. Simon Draper, I'm the Chief Executive.
No, he's gone too.
There on the phone, but the evidence now about
We've got issues. We've got issues. No, you're dropping out, in and out, Mr Draper. And
I might turn my video off and see if that's...
Yeah, maybe reboot, start again.
Let's just try it. Can you hear me now with my video off?
We can, yep.
Let's try this. It's Simon Draper. I'm the Chief Executive of Infrastructure New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Mather?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kerry Mather, CEO of Venues New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. And Ms Smythe?
My name's Tanya Smythe. I'm the Director of Women New South Wales Seniors and Carers in the Department of Communities and Justice. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
And let's try Ms McManus again. Can you hear us?
Chair, could you request Ms Delia to ask Ms McManus to answer her phone? We're trying to contact her.
Oh, okay.
But she's ignoring our phone.
Ms McManus, can you just answer the phone? We're trying to ring you.
She can't hear us, Chair.
She can't hear us at all.
You've got to ask the other lady.
Ask Miss Delia.
Is someone else with her, is it?
Miss Delia.
Miss Delia.
I'm sending her a text right now.
There you go.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Ms Delia, okay.
Oh, we get it.
When Robert's the chair,
But it's just the right wording.
he jinxes it.
So you can.
We're just going to stop for 5 minutes. We've got issues with Hansard,
Yeah, that's right.
so.
I might just put us on.
Chair, and thank you, Minister and officials, for coming this afternoon. Minister, were you aware that Multicultural New South Wales had ceased communication or advertising public health information on COVID-19 through multicultural media for 3 months prior to the lockdown?
Thank you, Mr. Mosselman. And thank you all for coming this afternoon. I feel like I'm in the fourth grade on a Saturday, so I appreciate your interest in these portfolio areas. Can I just clarify that question, Mr. Mosselman, in relation to the date that you're referring to?
3 months prior to the lockdown.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying which lockdown. Do you mean the first lockdown in
The last
March
lockdown,
2020?
the June lockdown.
The Delta strain,
Yes.
so this year?
Correct.
Okay. I'm not sure. I might have to take advice on that, Mr. Mosselman, but I'm not sure that we do advertising, if you're referring to advertising, if you mean translation services or...
No, it's communicating with the multilingual media and advertising public health information on COVID-19.
Yeah.
Just prior to, 3 months prior to Delta hit and the lockdown.
Yeah.
Why was there no advertising for 3 months prior to to the Delta?
Yep, I can speak to the resources we put into multicultural media, but in relation to the advertising specifically, I might ask Mr. Laposta, the Chief Executive of Multicultural New South Wales, to speak to that specifically.
Mr. Laposta?
Thanks, Mr. Mosselman. Through you, Minister. With regards to any purchasing of multicultural media or advertising, that's a question best directed to the Department of Customer Service or Minister Dominello.
It's not advertising, it's the communication with regards to public health information.
Yep.
The Multicultural New South Wales did not put any public health information on COVID-19 in the middle of a pandemic for 3 months prior to the last lockdown. Why did Multicultural New South Wales not have public health information in multilingual media? Simple question.
Well, I think okay, so I come back to my earlier point. With regards to external promotion or a media spend in terms of an investment in the media or public health information through multicultural media, that's a matter for the Department of Community and Department of Customer Service. With regards to communicating to multicultural communities, if that's what you're talking about through forums and communication, and I know there was a lot of conversation and conjecture between March and June, is that the term you're referring to, before the Delta outbreak?
I'm referring to public health information in multilingual media.
Yep.
Why did Multicultural New South Wales cease for 3 months?
Sorry, I might just jump in there. It's really important that we get the right answer to you, Mr. Mosselman. It's an important question. I just need to clarify the date that you're talking about.
3 months prior to Delta hit. 3 months prior to the lockdown.
So what date do you assert?
June.
Okay.
Mr. Mosselman,
Yeah,
I don't mean to be obstructive, but if you're talking about multicultural media, that's a matter for the Department of Customer Service.
Surely, Mr. Laposta, your agency prepares the material and then liaises with customer service.
Can I tell you what we do? Mr. Laposta might add to that, just to be clear.
Can I just ask the question, what did Multicultural New South Wales do in terms of communicating with multicultural communities during those 3 months prior to the lockdown? There was no advertising of public health information for 3 months. So there was no communication with the multicultural communities from Multicultural New South Wales for those 3 months.
Mr. Mosselman, a couple of things I'd like to clarify so I can help as far as possible. We might have to take on notice the specifics of what you're asking about. Can I say this? I had the privilege of becoming Minister for this portfolio on the 27th of May this year. And shortly thereafter, we had the Delta strain of COVID arrive. And Mr. Laposta and I worked very closely together since that time. And one of our first priorities was engagement. And we recognised early on the critical role of multicultural media. And in fact, we put out very quickly support to multicultural media.
You recognised later on the critical role of multicultural media.
Yes, so much so.
3 months before that, there was no recognition of the critical role
Well,
of
Mr.
multicultural media in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, the pandemic didn't hit yesterday.
No.
It's now almost
Quite right.
2 years. So you would have thought that Multicultural New South Wales would be communicating with multicultural.
I think we're in agreement. The role of multicultural media is critically important, and from the time that I started in this role, Mr. Laposta and I spoke, I think, almost every day.
There was a
So
real
sorry,
failure,
if you don't
isn't
mind,
it?
if I could just finish, it's an important point, if I may. Just to say that immediately I did start, we ensured that we had a series of engagements with the multicultural community
Right.
through community and religious leaders, non-government organisations and forums, but also specifically with media because we knew we had to get information out in language. If you're
and
talking
that's
about
the
prior
point.
to that time, Mr. Mossamain, and the 3 months
Minister,
prior,
I hear you and I agree with you. That's the point. I'm asking why Multicultural New South Wales, prior to you coming in, Minister, why didn't they communicate with the multicultural communities?
Yes.
But let me
As I
move
was just
on.
saying.
Clearly, there was no. I'm not going to get an answer on that one.
no, that's not
so
true, and
the-
it's very important I answer that if I may.
No, I want to move on.
Very
I'd
important
like
that I
to move
answer
on.
that, Mr. Mossamain, because I wasn't the minister in
Yes.
that time prior. So it's very important that we're clear about my evidence to this committee, if I may, that I wasn't the minister during that time. So I'm able to answer what I'm responsible for.
Okay.
But I would say that any advertising during that prior time is clearly within the remit of Minister Dominello and Customer Service.
So
and I'm happy to
Multicultural New
take
South
that
Wales
to
had
him.
nothing to do with it.
I'm happy to take that to him in relation to what was done prior to my time.
During the lockdown, Minister Hazzard tried to blame people of Western Sydney, people of non-English speaking background, for the spread of the coronavirus. And in fact, and I quote what he said, there are other communities and people from other backgrounds who don't seem to think that it is necessary to comply with the law and don't really give great consideration to what they do in terms of its impact on the rest of the community. So, and the reason why I asked the previous question is that in the light of these comments, why did Multicultural New South Wales choose not to communicate through multi-language media in the previous 3 months so multicultural communities could be better prepared for health orders? So the point is the failure of Multicultural New South Wales communicating for the previous 3 months prior to the lockdown meant that multicultural communities were not aware of the orders, were not aware of the health orders, were not aware of various issues, and yet the government blames multicultural communities for their failures.
So a couple of points, Mr. Mossamain. I think it's not accurate to surmise in the way that you have the role of Multicultural New South Wales. I would say it is of critical importance to those communities. We weren't, I think if you're referring to the April to June period, you said the 3 months prior to June. So if you're referring to April to June, I'm not sure that we were in lockdown during that time. The health messages, as soon as we were faced with the Delta virus, were communicated immediately.
So what did you do
The other
when-
general health messages are always available on Multicultural New
you haven't
South
got
Wales.
much
There were
Thank
no
you,
health
Minister.
orders at the time
What
you're
did you
referring
do?
to.
Go through and exhaust
What did you
yourselves
do,
and-
Minister, when the health minister, Brad Hazzard, accused migrant communities of responsible for spreading coronavirus in Western Sydney?
Well, I don't accept that that's what he said, but nonetheless, I have
He
been
said people of other background. It was clear. He was blaming people of other background for the spread of coronavirus in Western Sydney.
Yeah, what I would say, Mr. Mossamain, is that the COVID virus, in fact, the Delta strain of the COVID virus, doesn't see ethnicity. It doesn't see postcode.
But the government
It doesn't
did.
see.
The government did. It used...
Point of order, Chair. The Minister is trying to answer a question that's been put by Mr Mossman. I ask that the interjections from him to cease so the Minister can actually answer the question.
Interjections are disorderly, but please proceed.
If I might just clarify, Chair, Mr Mossamain, I think we're in furious agreement about the importance of Multicultural New South Wales, and I think my...
I moved on off that. I'm talking about the Minister's statement. I moved off that. We're in critical agreement, I agree. I'm now asking questions about the Minister's statement, blaming migrants of other background for the spread of coronavirus in Western Sydney. What was your response to the Minister and what did you do about it?
And I'm attempting to provide you with a response, Mr. Mosman, if I may. It is of critical importance, which was why I was delighted to have been asked to join the ministry in this role. What I would say is that we were communicating daily with Multicultural New South Wales communities through peak bodies, through religious leaders, community leaders, non-government organisations, and our engagement record shows that very clearly.
Did you put out a statement, a press release, remedying that statement from Minister Hazard saying you don't support what he said?
Well, I've put on the record that I don't necessarily agree with your contextualisation of what he said, but nonetheless, that's a question for him. What I can talk to this committee about is what I did, and what I did was advocate very strongly and work very closely with New South Wales Health and Police throughout the Delta strain. And it's important to know that this government has allocated a record amount of funding to multicultural communities throughout the Delta pandemic. $54.7 million says that we recognise the importance of the
Well,
we're here for budget estimates, Mr. Mossman. It's a very important number.
Yeah,
it's record
I'll come
funding.
to that, Minister. You know our times are limited, so I'll come to that question. By the time Minister Hazard made those unfortunate statements in August 2021, there had been 26 versions of the main public health orders in only 45 days. That's a new version on average over every 42 hours. How do you expect multicultural citizens who have limited English supposed to comply with such rapidly changing orders when they had been left without language-specific public health information for 3 months?
Yeah, this is very, very, very important, and I thank you for your interest in the area, because we know at the time we had to partner with communities to ensure we got information out to them in language in every channel and every corner of the community that we could. We did that by partnering with religious and community leaders directly so that they could speak to their communities, and also so that they could provide us with the critical feedback that we needed to understand what communities needed on the ground. And I thank them for their partnership, because we spoke daily, one-on-one through direct phone calls between Joseph and I and community and religious leaders. We spoke, and the Premier at the time also made direct phone calls. We held more than 60 forums with non-government organisations, community and religious leaders.
You failed, Minister, to use the media, multicultural media, to communicate with multicultural communities.
I don't think that over 60 forums and individual engagements with more than 4,500 people is a failure, Mr. Mosman.
I'm talking about the use of multicultural media. I'll come to the other stuff later on.
Can I talk to you about media then?
No, I want to move on now. You've clearly had no idea initially, as you indicated. Western Sydney residents say, according to The Guardian, that they are being used as a scapegoat and unfairly branded. The former Premier herself had to apologise for, in one respect, using them as a scapegoat. Don't you think that that would have incited, or at least created unfair criticism against migrant communities across the state?
Mr. Mossman, I think it's very important to understand just how much was done during this time. We partnered with SBS to ensure and put $4 million of funding to SBS to communicate to our communities. The health information updated daily. The 11 o'clock press conference was translated live in 10 languages, a first for Australia, recognising the importance of those communities. And we funded...
Wait a minute. Let her answer.
Well, it's a very important question, and I thank you for your interest in it. And I'd just like to be very clear so the committee has that information to hand. We also had regular weekly multicultural press briefings at which Dr. Jan Fazell and I... and
3 months. There was a 3 month gap. No communication whatsoever with multicultural communities.
It's not correct,
It's
Mr.
correct.
Mossman, with respect.
Well, I'll take the point of order. The member is arguing with the witness as opposed to allowing her answer. I ask that the members show at least a modicum of courtesy and allow the minister to complete her answer before asking the next question.
I'll uphold the point of order.
Mr. Mossman, I might hand to Mr. Laposta to give some specifics on the engagement and the advertising, because it is important, and we should provide that clarity to the committee.
Mr. Mossman, I think the first point is our multicultural communities have been extraordinary in terms of how they've tackled COVID since January and February, and we had this conversation last year as we watched it spread across through Iran and Italy and then ultimately to Australia in March. We had interpreters at the airport. You know how strong our multicultural communities have been, and you know how effective they were, particularly community and religious leaders. In March of this year, there was still advertising, and I can give you the specifics on that and take it on notice. But to say that this agency didn't engage with multicultural communities between March and June is factually incorrect. And I'm happy to give you the specifics in terms of any forums that we had, because I know personally how invested I was in supporting our subcontinent and South Asian communities as the Delta wave ripped through India. So, to be honest, I don't think it's fair to say that this agency and this government did not communicate with multicultural communities between March and June, and I'm happy to give you the specifics of that on notice.
Mr. Laposta, Western Sydney Western Sydney University Senior Research Fellow, specialising in migration and diversity, Dr. Sukhmani Khurana said, and I quote, instead of jumping on the bandwagon of extra surveillance, they should have provided more multilingual services, consulted more closely with community members. Do you not agree with the doctor in that regard? This is a doctor, a specialist in this area. She clearly identifies that there was a failure in multilingual services during the coronavirus or during the last outbreak.
Yeah, thank you. Might have a look at that if we may. I'm not familiar with that, Mr. Mossman. If we could just see that quote, and Mr. Laposta might be able to provide an answer to you on that.
Take it as, from me that that's the case. I'm quoting exactly what she's saying.
When was it, Mr. Mossman?
I'm asking the question.
I just don't know the provenance of what I'm not. I'd like to understand it so
Context
I can provide you with a thorough answer.
It's a good way of eating time. I don't know where it is. Okay.
15 minutes.
Yeah. You want to get it?
Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good.
No, she can see it.
Thank you. While Mr. Laposta's having a look at that, I might assist by just indicating that our online engagement forums, where we engage directly with all of those groups, were then supported by the agency holding one-on-one qualitative interviews to understand between half an hour and an hour regularly to understand what the community needed and get that feedback, Mr. Mossman. And so those interviews provided the agency and ultimately me with direct feedback and contextualised insight into the community experiences of the pandemic. That was ongoing. That was literally from the weekend after I was sworn in, and Joseph and I worked tirelessly to make sure that we were getting into those communities.
Well, let her finish. Let her finish. Otherwise, take a formal point of order.
Minister, to reinforce the point that there was failure in communication, members of the opposition went on social media, spoke in their own languages in order to communicate with the community because Multicultural New South Wales, or your department, failed to communicate with them on those very important issues. That's why they had to take it upon themselves to address that issue.
Mr. Mossman, the evidence just simply does not support that assertion, and I appreciate members helping spread the message. We had sporting heroes that spread the message. We had a number of community and religious leaders who spread the message, but the facts are, Mr. Mossman, we had language support and COVID-19 translations in 61 languages, 2,068 total assignments. The numbers speak for themselves about how much work was done. We had 680 community sentiment interviews, one-on-one, during that time. That is not doing nothing.
Point of order.
Well, there's only 2 minutes.
It is just not doing.
I don't care. If the minister is answering the question, then she's entitled.
The government doesn't care.
Order.
Minister,
I just don't know, Mr. Mossman, how you can see those numbers and make the assertion that you're making. I appreciate that
these are based on statements.
Well, I'll take the point of order again.
I'm starting now.
Not finished, Shaq. Let her answer the question without arguing with her.
Mr Mossman, I would just say that Multicultural has led an intensive campaign of community and stakeholder engagement. It was our number one priority, and in partnership with New South Wales Health, with the New South Wales Police Force, with other agencies. They were part of a specific subgroup of Cabinet which dealt with the Delta outbreak and our response to that, and I'd invite Mr Laposta to speak specifically to that.
Can I ask you the final question before my time runs? Why then would councillors such as Councillor Kung Huang from Cumberland take it upon himself to organise community groups to speak in various languages, Chinese and others, to address the lack of communication? And he said in one of the interviews that he's done with The Guardian that he was disappointed that the government had not worked out a better communication strategy, and this was putting vulnerable people at risk. I mean, there's members of the community clearly speaking out that there was a failure in communication from Multicultural New South Wales during this very critical period.
Yeah, so Mr Mosselman, I'll hand to Mr Laposta, but it's important to understand that since the Delta outbreak, a total of $13.1 million of funding for communications initiatives was secured for multicultural communities. It included emergency communications, multicultural media grants, translations and advertising for vulnerable communities, and $6 million of this funding was used for targeted multicultural media advertising and translations. I don't think that's nothing, but Mr Laposta might like to speak to that more.
Certainly, Minister, through you. Mr Mosselman, I think there's a couple of things here. Just because they're assertions doesn't make them accurate assertions is the first thing. And what I will go on the record and say is, and I know this because I come from a non-English speaking background, is that it does take a little bit longer in terms of government information for non-English speaking backgrounds to embed. Mr Mosselman, if I take you back to before the 16th of June this year, we had a very fatigued and tired community that had done an incredible job of navigating COVID up until that point. And since then, to be frank, has done an incredible job. And I came to this, Mr Mosselman, I came to this committee and said that if there was anywhere that COVID could go wrong, it's in a state like New South Wales, which has 307 different ancestries, 220 different languages, and 146 different religions. This state, and every member of this state, should be incredibly proud of how we have managed this pandemic, in spite of such challenging times, in spite of some of those barriers to language. And yes, I acknowledge that videos and those sorts of things are very, very helpful ways to communicate with people, and that it's all well and good to translate a document, but that doesn't mean that it embeds within the communities. I acknowledge that, but that's why we did one-on-one phone calls with people. That's why we saturated multicultural media outlets through traditional forms like print and radio. That's why we went on organisations like Samoan Radio every Monday morning to communicate with them and support them in language to have the material they need. So I don't think it's a respectful or fair assertion to say that this agency did nothing. And it's also important to acknowledge this agency is a part of New South Wales government, and that things like advertising and so forth are not the role of Multicultural New South Wales. Whilst we play a collaborative role, they are the role of colleagues at the Department of Customer Service. And we have done an incredible amount of work with them to make sure that any barriers to information have been overcome, particularly in the last few months.
Minister, can you provide us a breakdown of the
Well,
$31 million?
just before you go on, I think the bell went.
The $31 million.
I'll be the arbiter of that.
Sure,
Well, I was going to
gladly.
take the point.
You want to move into the chair?
No. But I noticed that Ms Abigail Boyd
Well, I
doesn't
was
quite
getting-
have the capacity of...
Well, Ms Boyd's got a lot of capacity. Don't worry about that.
Yes.
Ms Boyd, any questions?
Thank you very much, and for that further support for my capacity. Good
No,
afternoon.
I didn't finish answering, Abigail.
That's why I cut him off.
It is lovely to see you, Minister.
It's lovely to see you, Ms Boyd, albeit on a screen. Hello. Thank you for joining the last of the last.
So I wanted to ask you about the Equal Pay for Equal Play campaign, which, as you know, is a campaign to make gender equity a condition for sporting organisations to receive state government grants, funding and tenders, which would include equal prize money and equal opportunity for men and women, as well as an actionable strategy to increase participation, engagement and ongoing support of women and girls at all levels of competition. You'll also know that the Upper House recently passed a motion supporting the campaign, which was not opposed by the government. Do you support the campaign, Minister?
Thank you, Ms Boyd, and thank you for your interest in this very important area. Can I say at the outset, I think prior to being privileged to serve in this role, it was pretty clear that I'm a very strong supporter of women's participation in sport and a strong advocate for women in sport. So I come to this role with that very clear background, and I would say that I'm an advocate for women's progress in sport at every level. It's important that, so my short answer is yes to your question. I was very proud to support your notice of motion and not just not object to it, but to support it actively. And I thank you for bringing the motion to the House. It was a very good one. And can I say that it's very important that we support opportunities for women, not just on the ground, but across the board, through boardrooms, through our officials, our selection committees, our coaches, from just playing on the ground through to, and winning prize money, which is also important, through to every level of participation so that we're getting actual progress across the board. But we're doing a lot in this space, and if I might just invite Ms Jones to comment on what we are doing in this space, because I know you have been interested in it, and I appreciate that question.
Thank you, Minister. What I can say, particularly about the petition and in relation to equal prize money, that it is certainly an issue that does have deep roots in the broader culture across the sporting landscape. And for us at the Office of Sport, we want to take a really holistic approach, not just to prize money, but how we can actually improve participation of sport for women and girls across the full spectrum. So not just in relation to prize money, but also looking at how we can encourage more girls to stay in sport post their teenage years, how we can encourage more female leaders in sporting organisations to not only lead organisations, but also participate in boardrooms, how we can get more coaches involved in not just community sport, but all the way through to the elite level, and particularly at our Olympic level. And then also, of course, how we can encourage girls and women and girls to participate in an officiating capacity on the field as well. When it does actually come to equal prize money, I think we do need to understand that the sporting landscape is quite complex, and the issue itself is quite complex as well. When you talk about equal prize money, you do actually have to factor in other issues such as sponsorship deals, such as any sort of enterprise agreements that athletes may have already entered into, or any sort of contractual arrangements that they may have already entered into as well. So whilst at the Office of Sport, and particularly through our Her Sport, Her Way strategy, which has been in place now for 3 years, we want to encourage equality across sport for all women and girls. Equal prize money is absolutely a factor, but it's not the only factor.
Thank you. Given that you have the ability through the grants process to set, a series of eligibility requirements, I guess, for those grants, I do hear what you're saying in relation to sponsorship and the equal pay, but presumably there is more that a lot of these sporting organisations could be doing to increase equity, gender equity in their relevant sports. What will you be doing in the grants process to try and at least encourage that behaviour from our sporting organisations?
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and I appreciate your interest in it, because it's something that I have made it clear that it's a key focus for me, and I'm really appreciative that we have a woman who is our Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Sport. She gets it entirely. But can I say that we've invested $162.3 million in initiatives to support women and girls in sport. So it's not just an initiative, it's not just a piece of paper and a strategy. We're putting funding behind that to ensure that those initiatives do support women and girls in sport. And that includes, among other things, our Active Kids vouchers, which have been redeemed by girls to ensure they're participating in sport at that level and assist families with the cost of living to do so. But also, I think you asked about the sporting organisations. $54 million has gone to 91 sporting infrastructure projects, which included a priority focus on providing female-friendly facility design. and that's an important component of ensuring that women who are participating, once we've got them involved, are actually having a good player experience on the ground. And we're encouraging those organisations, to answer your question, to provide female-friendly facilities and design and involve them in that. And then we also have $50 million in the Stronger Communities Fund for projects that enhance female sporting facilities and increase participation. And of course, our to your question, $4.3 million for programs and initiatives to reduce barriers and grow participation for women and girls in sport. I can go on, but I might just ask Ms Jones to add to that specifically.
Thank you, Minister.
Just before you do, Ms Jones, I just wanted to narrow the question, because that is all very pleasing and it's great, but we can always be doing more.
Yep.
You do have the power to change the eligibility requirements in a way that would preclude certain organisations who are not, living up to expectations from applying for grants. So, will you be looking at the grants eligibility criteria in the various programs and seeing if they can be tightened up in a way that would provide a more tangible incentive for gender equity in sport?
Yes, thank you. And I've already done that. So I specifically asked, and can I use the word directed? I say asked, but apparently it's directed, the department to amend the guidelines to ensure that we did encourage, and they had to have a policy in place, and we did encourage them to let us know about that. But Ms Jones might speak to specifically how we did that.
Yes, thank you, Minister. So in relation to funding that's actually provided to sporting organisations, the Minister has comprehensively already gone through the funding that we provide, particularly for infrastructure projects, and how over the last couple of years, in fact, we've actually given priority through our grant guidelines and through the objectives of those guidelines to sporting facilities, particularly that encourage women and girls' participation. But on top of that, we also provide organisation support funding, particularly to our state sporting organisations and state sporting organisations for people with a disability. And this year, in relation to that, that funding, the guidelines will be amended to actually require organisations to demonstrate that they have women in sport strategies in place and how they actually look at promoting more gender equality across their sport.
We've also, if I can just add to that, amended the Centres of Excellence guidelines to specifically include that as well. And can I just say that I'm absolutely committed, and this government is committed to building a stronger sport sector where women and girls don't just participate, but they're valued and they're recognised, and they have those equal opportunities and choices that allow them to participate. And I mean, no disrespect to any blokes in the room, but for a long time, men have been seen as the only sort of sporting content able to be commercialised. And I think there's an enormous opportunity in commercialisation of women's sport. Watch the netball on a Saturday and you'll see what I mean. So that emphasis to date has resulted in a skewed payment scheme across the sporting sector, which I think is ripe for us to remedy. So sports broadcasters and major companies are now seeing the value of women's athletes, particularly post the Olympics, and we're seeing major moves towards pay parity in that space. We will continue to invest and support and facilitate progress in the sector toward that aim.
Thank you, Minister. Chair, I'm at a disadvantage. I can't see how much time I've got, but perhaps I'll leave it there for now and come back in the next round.
Well, you can keep going if you want.
I can keep talking till the bell goes.
No, you've got more time if you need it.
Time do I have?
Another 10 minutes if you want.
Okay, how much? 10 minutes? Okay. I wanted to turn then to the active kids vouchers. Could you, Minister, let us know what's been done to specifically help the sector with the burden of administering the active kids voucher program?
Yes, I'm happy to. Can I just ask if there's a specific aspect of it that is burdensome?
So we had heard that it took a number of providers by surprise when the COVID restrictions were lifted, and at the times they were lifted, there was a lot of change in the rules, and then they were flooded with applications or with voucher requests, and this was quite a lot of burden on the sector, is what my office is being told. I guess I'm interested in whether that has come across your radar, And if so, what is being done to make that process easier?
Yeah, thank you. I'd be interested to look at those specific examples and take that up if I may, but can I say this from our experience, and I'm advised that nothing has changed in the application process or the ability to process those quickly, and they are designed to be quick and easy for parents to log on and obtain through Service New South Wales. I have logged on and redeemed my vouchers. I haven't been able to use them like many parents, but certainly even if I can do it, I think pretty much anyone can. But it was clear that we had a huge uptake of the vouchers, but if there's specific, I might just ask Ms Jones if she's experienced any, had any feedback on that.
No, we haven't, so, sorry.
Clarify, before you do, Ms Jones, can I just clarify? I agree with you that for parents to actually apply for these vouchers is quite a straightforward process. The problem comes at how the providers themselves can then sort of take that voucher information and apply for it with the Office of Sport.
Yeah, thank you. I might ask Ms Jones to take that.
Yes, thank you, Minister. I would be actually quite interested to see some of those complaints if you have received them, simply because we have not received those through the Office of Sport. So we're always interested in improving our process and particularly our customer experience when it comes to the redemption of Active Kids vouchers. What I can imagine is obviously after a period of lockdown when community sport unfortunately wasn't occurring, that the sports may then have received an influx of people wanting to redeem their vouchers. And I think what we all need to appreciate is that community sporting organisations are often run by volunteers. They're run by mums and dads and sometimes aren't necessarily supported by the best of administration or administrative procedures from their end. If that's the case, and if there are specific sports where there are general trends and themes, then the Office of Sport's incredibly interested in working with those sports to improve the experience.
Please let us know. My door's open, and I would love to hear how we can make it easier, because those volunteers are doing enough as it is, running those clubs and associations and trying to keep them going. And I appreciate their experience. I've been close to a grassroots club. I know how much they have to do. So if we can help to make it easier, we are there to get those vouchers out the door and get kids playing.
Agreed. We'll be in touch. Can I ask you how the Active Kids Vouchers program has been evaluated and on what criteria?
Thank you. I know Ms Jones can speak more to this, but we do have, as you say, an evaluation criteria. It's conducted by, happily named, the Sprinter group. That's right. And they conduct that evaluation. I think it's aptly named. But I'll ask her to speak to the specifics of how that is done.
Yes, thank you, Minister. That's correct. So the Office of Sport entered into an arrangement with the Sprinter Group, who's actually run out of Sydney University. So it's an independent evaluation. And that evaluation, the first evaluation report, was actually released earlier on this year. And there's been many academic articles also published around that evaluation as well. The upshot of that evaluation was that as a result of Active Kids, there has been an increase in the physical activity levels of children it equates to approximately an extra day. So that's a significant achievement given how many children are actually assigned or actually participate in Active Kids. And we're very pleased to see that the Active Kids voucher is actually making a difference.
I might just add to that, just to clarify on those, for those parents or providers who had vouchers redeemed and weren't able to use them due to the lockdown, we have extended those so they can use those again. So if they have gone to the trouble of processing them, they'll be able to apply again to use those. We're really keen to make sure that continued to be available and that opportunity wasn't lost for this year.
Thank you. Are you able to tell me, is the data relating to children who are the subject of these Active Kids vouchers, is that data available within Service New South Wales for any Service New South Wales employee to access, or are there privacy restrictions in place?
Ms Jones might speak to that.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, absolutely. There are strict privacy rules around the data that's retained for Active Kids. If you want specifics on that, I'm happy to take that on notice around what the rules are around access to the privacy or access to the data from a privacy perspective.
That would be very useful if you could let me know approximately how many employees or what class of employees would have access to that data.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Ms Boyd. I might just add that these questions are properly directed to Minister Dominello and Service New South Wales. We're very happy to facilitate getting the questions to him, but I just would point out that he runs Service New South Wales, and his agency is responsible for the conduct of the Service New South Wales app and the information contained on it. But we'd be happy to take those questions to him.
Thank you, that'd be very useful. So just in addition to sort of how many employees and what their level of access is, what their position description is or whatever, that gives them access to that data. Also whether they've had working with children checks. That would be very useful. The first lap program, have you got any feedback so far on how that is actually increasing funding or I guess the quality of regional pools?
Sorry, increasing the, what did you say, quality of regional pools?
The quality, yeah. So in terms of, I understand that a lot of the regional pools don't get direct funding, and please do correct me if that's wrong. They don't get direct grants, but many of them are eligible for this first lap program, which I actually admit that I have not heard of previously. I was curious as to whether that had been evaluated and whether it was resulting in improvements to the standards of those regional pools.
Yeah, thank you. It's an excellent question. And can I just say that in relation to the first lap program, we were very keen to get that out, given that those critical years for kids learning those vital water safety skills was something that we prioritised and in fact extended to kindy kids this year and kindy kids next year, because they've had that interruption to their potential to have those lessons. So that was the prioritisation of that program at this time. That was, and Ms Jones might speak more to this, but it was more about the participation rates than particular areas. So but I might get her to speak to that specifically.
Yes, thank you, Minister. The First Lap program is actually targeting our preschool and our kindergarten children in learn to swim lessons. It's not necessarily infrastructure based. It is more about helping families being able to afford to send their preschool age children and their kindergarten children to learn to swim in learn to swim programs.
So what other funding is available for regional pools?
So there's a range of funds that we have available in regional areas, and the regional grants program, the Greater Sydney and Regional Grants program, is specifically to assist with local infrastructure, and I'm really pleased that we've been able to continue that. And those centres should, some are obviously run with councils or by councils, but they are most welcome to apply as well. And so that is the fund that's specifically for regional facilities, and that's why it's called Regional Facilities Fund, to be able to deal with some of those infrastructure issues. There's also the local sport fund, but Karen Jones might like to add to that.
Thank you, Minister. Yes, there is a range of infrastructure grant programs of which local councils and sporting organisations are eligible, noting that most regional pools are actually owned by local government or managed by local government. The Minister's correct. We have the Regional Sport Facility Fund, which is $50 million over 2 years, $25 million on offer this year, of which those organisations could actually apply for swimming pool facilities. There's also announced in the budget for this year and soon to be released is the Multi-Sport Facility Fund, in which, again, that is to support infrastructure development, whether it be upgrades or new facilities. And the only catch to that one is that it has to be multi-sport, but as we know with swimming pools, they're not just for lap swimming, but they're also for water polo, diving, synchronised swimming. There's a whole range of other multi-sport, yeah, that's right, that could also benefit from that fund as well.
But we're trying to make a range of funds available if we wherever we possibly can, so that from every level, from those smaller regional facilities through to the larger multi-sport across the board, that they're able to access programs at various levels depending on what kind of upgrades they need.
Labor.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister.
Chair, this is my sports questions, so back to you.
Thank you.
Minister, I want to ask you about the status of the National Accreditation Scheme for Sports Scientists and Strength and Conditioning Coaches. What is the status of implementation of that scheme in New South Wales?
Thank you. That's something I may have to take on notice. I'm a big fan of strength and conditioning and don't do enough of it, but I must say that I don't know the current status of that, so I will take that on notice.
Jones, are you able to throw some light on that?
Yes, look, I support the Minister's stance in that we would take that on notice. That question, I'm more than happy to coordinate a response from our New South Wales Institute of Sport for you.
Are you able to tell me whether the accreditation scheme applies to the New South Wales Institute of Sport?
That's something I'll also take on notice and get that answer to you.
I see. Are you able to tell me then how many, on notice, how many of the sports scientists employed at the New South Wales Institute of Sport meet the accreditation requirements of the Exercise and Sport Science Australia accreditation scheme? And are you also able to take on notice what the compliance arrangements are that apply at the New South Wales Institute of Sport in terms of ensuring that sports scientists employed there are accredited under the ESSA scheme?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Given they've just sent a ton of people to the Olympics and Paralympics, I think that it's a good question because it's something that they would have been focusing on.
Thanks. So I might move to the Grassroots Sports Fund. Can I ask how many organisations out of the, I think, an estimated 12,500 eligible clubs and associations actually accessed the 2020 round? Do you have that information at hand?
I very much hope all of them, and I hope it's been a quick and easy process for them to access it, but we might have to take the specifics for 2020 on notice, given that was before my time, but I'd be very interested in that as well.
If you're going to take that on notice, can you take on notice how many applications were made and how many were approved for the 2020? And are you able to provide details of the successful applicants in terms of sport and location?
Sorry, sport and location?
Location.
Yeah, it was before my time, but absolutely happy to take that on notice to get that data.
I can provide that background. Yep.
Can I ask about the support for sports organisations? Is it correct to say that up until the recent re-announcement of a 2021 round for the Grassroots Sports Fund, that the primary mechanism for providing financial support to sporting clubs was through the COVID-19 business support grants? Is that correct to say that was the...
Sorry, which year are you now still...
21 now.
So the most recent recovery package, is that what you're referring to?
Most recent recovery.
Yep, the 25 million.
I understand that package was only recently announced in October.
That's correct.
Prior to that...
23rd of October.
I wanted to clarify, was the primary mechanism that the government was using to support sports clubs the business grant program that applied to small business, the generic business support grant? Is it correct to say that was the primary mechanism for providing financial support to sporting clubs?
Yeah, I would say I'll ask Ms Jones to speak to that specifically, but yes, sporting clubs could access those funds if they met the eligibility criteria for that fund, as with any fund, and we would encourage them to do so. We have a range, however, that would not be the only forum, but I'll ask Ms Jones to speak to that.
Thank you, Minister. In terms of financial support to the sports sector, particularly during the most recent lockdown, I will say that the Office of Sport not only provided advice, and we also provided, we basically provided a 24-hour service to the sporting organisations where they could actually filter through any questions or concerns through to us, and they would get a response. Now, in terms of financial support, during the lockdown itself, yes, the state sporting organisations could avail themselves to a range of packages that were announced by the New South Wales Government. That includes things like JobSaver for not-for-profits.
Pick you up on that, so I just want to get some clarification. So
Sure.
you're talking about state sporting organisations.
Yes, sorry, that's probably just my
I wanted
lingo.
to
Yep.
ask about sports clubs, so local clubs.
Do you mean grassroots clubs and
Grassroots sports,
associations?
yeah.
Yep,
The
understand.
kind of clubs that the Grassroots Sports Fund is directed at.
Yep.
Which, as I understand, isn't the state sporting associations.
Yes, so those grassroots sport clubs actually report through the state sporting organisations, and the state sporting organisations, and I should also qualify by saying the state sporting organisations for people with disability as well. They're our main stakeholder group that we actually liaise through to them, because as you've already quoted, there's over 12,500 grassroots sport clubs. So we use the state sporting organisations as the main conduit.
It's the mediator.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
so those clubs and associations, and I know because I've been involved with a couple of them, are then obviously members, if they choose to be, of those state sporting organisations and state sporting organisations for people with a disability. They feed through, and the funding is annual funding to them, and that trickles down as well. But there's also a range of other funding packages available, including our sport recovery package, the $25 million one.
Yes.
And can I just say, there's also the local sports grants, which are there to assist those clubs and associations.
That's
with,
right, that's the one that I mentioned before, isn't it? The
facilities.
Grassroots Sports Fund is
No,
the...
there's
Another
that.
one.
There's another fund,
local
is there?
sports grants, which every area is entitled to as well.
This is not, sorry, can I just clarify that local sports, that's not COVID specific, is it? That's just a normal...
Yes.
That's recurrent.
Yep. And then we also have, if you're talking about those, there's a separate surf clubs facility fund, so the surf clubs have that one in place as well. And then there's a range of, as we say, the multi-sport facility funds, Centres of Excellence and Greater Cities and Regional Sport Facilities Funds.
Thank you. Can I draw you back to the specific question, which is about the business grants? So is it correct to say that that was the mechanism that you were using to provide financial support to local clubs?
I would
Not
say
the
it's one of,
states.
yes, sorry.
The primary mechanism for financial support. There was no other package that provided that kind of financial support to local clubs.
I'll take that on notice, but I would say that there are a range. I'm not sure I do agree with it being the only mechanism. I don't think it's fair.
Primary.
I'm sorry, primary. There are a range of funds available, but also it's for those clubs to apply for those support packages, and so they may choose to apply for them or choose to apply for another one. It might, it's not for us to direct what is their primary source.
Let me perhaps put another proposition to you about if you're a local sporting club that was encountering financial difficulty, what advice was being provided by the Office of Sport around financial assistance that was available?
Yep, so I'll throw to Ms Jones on that specifically, but can I say that, now that we're reopened and sporting clubs, I worked very closely with to hear from them and get their direct feedback about what they wanted in terms of recovery. And the number one thing that they asked for was for us to reopen. And so I was very vocal about that, because opening their doors, getting their registrations in...
Just draw you back, Minister.
Yeah, but sorry, it's a financial contribution. I'm trying to get to that. The financial contribution that they told us they wanted was to get participation rates back in and get their registrations in and get their gate takings again from games. In addition to that, we have the $1,000 per club through the $25 million, and then there's a number of other things that Ms Jones might speak to around active kids and other aspects.
Thank you, Minister. I think, again, just to touch on grassroots and community clubs, again, most of those are actually volunteer-run and volunteer-based, and so their employee sort of overhead costs are absolutely minimal. The biggest expense they actually incur is typically through facility rentals, again, which most of those are through local government, and during the pandemic, those fees were waived. In terms of active kids, so a lot of clubs were concerned that whilst some families had actually redeemed their vouchers, that the clubs would then be asked to return the money, and the New South Wales government made the decision that they could actually keep the redeemed active kids vouchers, and we did that last year during the pandemic as well.
Can you provide on notice the quantum of active kids support that was provided on the basis of that arrangement that you just specified in terms of not requiring them to be returned
Absolutely.
And can you also provide a notice how many sporting clubs were able to apply for the COVID-19 business grant? How many actually applied and were successful in relation to...
2020.
In 2020, yes, that's
Yes.
right. Oh, no, this is for the 2021 period prior to the announcement of the
Yeah.
latest
Sure.
support
I might add,
package.
just in relation to the Active Kids administration, that again is through Minister Dominello and Service New South Wales, but we're very happy to get that information. But I would add, in relation to that, in terms of operating costs for grassroots clubs, during the shutdown, they didn't really have any operating costs because they were shut. So for that reason, there was really just rent, which was waived, and then the $1,000 injection. So there wasn't actually a lot of expenditure being incurred.
Why did you wait until after the reopening to announce a financial support package?
I'm not sure there was any science to it other than we worked closely in partnership with the community sporting sector, and I specifically worked with 15 of the peak bodies to understand from them what they needed and what they wanted, and that was to reopen. And it was part of the broader economic...
The reopening, though, Minister. So
I beg your pardon?
shouldn't have the financial support preceded the reopening, the return of community sport?
No, not according to the sector. What they said to us was they wanted reopening first, as I said earlier, because they wanted the registrations to come through. They wanted certainty around what is left of the season. They obviously lost the winter season, and what is left of the summer season they were very keen to kick off, if I can use that analogy. And so they were keen to, things like gate takings are very important on game day, merchandise, being able to get people back on the ground, and those registration fees are really important components of grassroots clubs, as I'm sure you're aware. So, but the financial package, so what they said to me directly in our ongoing engagement was they needed to be able to reopen first for training and then for competition. And we were very active with the Minister for Health to try and push for that to happen as quickly as possible. And then they said that the recovery package is something they would need once they're reopened, and the $1,000 per club cash injection was aimed to do exactly that. And it was also part of the greater recovery package that we put in place. But Ms Jones might want to add something to that.
Actually, I've got another question. I've got limited time, of course. So can I ask about the return? In terms of the preparatory work for the reopening roadmap, did the Office of Sport make representations to Health to seek the return of community support to be reopened at 70% vaccination rate?
That is an excellent question, and the answer is emphatically yes. We worked very closely with the organisation. It was something that we were not prepared to let Health kick into the long grass. We were very much going to tackle Israel Folau head on, and so we were very keen to get out there. I'm amazed that that the Health Minister continued to take my calls, but we were very active working with them because we know as they emerged out of the last lockdown that they are these clubs and associations are very good at managing COVID-safe plans. They did so last time as they emerged, and we worked very closely with them. In fact, I've got a copy of the letter here where we put together a very clear plan about how we could work together and put that to Health, and Health agreed. And so that was something we worked very closely with the sector on, and I thank those 15 peak bodies who worked so closely with me and all of the state sporting organisations who gave us that feedback about the reopening, as you rightly identify, in relation to training and then through to competition, because we knew that we couldn't let much more of the season go on without letting those organisations reopen. And so part of that plan was reassuring them, knowing that they know their registrants really well, they know their players incredibly well, and you give any of those volunteers a high-vis vest and they are pretty damn good at enforcing a COVID safety plan for the people that they love and adore in their playing community. So,
thanks, Minister.
Yeah.
Can I move on to another question about there seems to be a disparity between the approach to reopening of gym and dance classes and the standard that's applied to nightclubs where there's dancing. One has the gym and dance classes are still subject to the 20 people limit. What advocacy have you undertaken to remove this irregularity or this inconsistency in the approach that's being taken to the health orders?
Yeah, thank you. Again, that's those decisions are made by the health, the Department of Health on health advice, and certainly while I am very keen, and I think the Premier was very keen to see gyms reopened, and I know my husband was as well. But they were matters for the health officials and to make those decisions, because I think they presented.
My question was about the advocacy that you've undertaken.
Yes.
Have you written to Health about this issue?
No.
Have you raised it with the Health Minister?
Nightclubs are not within my portfolio as much as I would love them to be.
No, but gyms and presumably dance classes do fall within your portfolio responsibility. You're supposed to be an advocate for the industry in government. Have you been advocating to the Minister about eliminating this inconsistency?
I haven't advocated for nightclubs, no, Mr. Dadham.
Can I turn to another issue? I understand that that Parramatta Park currently falls within your remit, is that correct?
Parramatta Park, what aspect of it? The ownership of it, or the conduct of it, or the management of it?
Currently, I know that that's obviously subject to some...
No. I'm advised that that's Parklands, New South Wales.
Parramatta Park Reserve, Minister for Sport, under the Admin Orders, Crown Land Management Act, insofar as it relates to the Crown Land known as Parramatta Park. It's within your remit, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll hand to Ms Jones. She's got the specifics on that.
I would actually like the context of your question.
Sure.
If it relates...
I was going to ask about Wisteria Gardens, which is currently part of the old Cumberland Hospital site, and there was an undertaking, as I understand it, in 2017 that it be returned, or that it be transferred to the management of the Parramatta Park Trust. And I wanted to know what the status of those discussions are.
The Parramatta Park Trust is actually something that comes under Parklands, Greater Sydney Parklands, New South Wales, which is administered by the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment.
So what's the extent of the Minister's responsibility in terms of Parramatta Park?
It's Western Sydney Stadium.
The stadium, is that the only element that you control?
It might fall, it's a part of venues, so venues, on the creation of Venues New South Wales, the stadium entities came under the one body, and that aspect, the stadium aspect, falls within our remit. Or Venues New South Wales remit.
I expect that that's probably outside your remit then, because it doesn't...
The transfer, yes.
The transfer, okay, that's fine.
But we'd be happy to take a question to Minister Stokes.
We'll put it on notice to the relevant minister.
Sure.
Can I ask about the application of the National Redress Scheme to sporting organisations?
Mm-hmm.
What approach is the New South Wales government taking to encourage state sporting organisations to sign on to the National Redress Scheme?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I appreciate your interest in it. Having practiced in the area, I know the importance of it, particularly in organisations. I might hand to Ms Jones on the specifics of it and how that's being rolled out through those state sporting organisations, but I know it is.
Thank you, Minister. I do want to acknowledge that there were a number of state sporting organisations in particular where they were actually identified through the National Redress Scheme, and the Office of Sport requires them to sign up to the National Redress Scheme in order to obtain any funding or any recognition.
Thank you. Okay, I might now turn to...
Thank you for the question, it's important.
What's going to happen to the Sydney Olympic Park Kudos Bank Arena? When is that going to be returned to being able to be utilised by sporting organisations?
Around about now, isn't it?
Does that happen?
Again, that I think falls, I understand that it is complex and it shouldn't be, but it is. I think that falls within the remit of SOPA, and that again falls within Minister Stokes' portfolio responsibilities under planning.
Okay.
But I'd very much welcome it being returned.
All right, how much time have I got? 30 seconds. I might come back to...
You can keep going.
I can keep going? Right. Do you want to just grab a question while I find my...
Yeah. Minister, can I ask you questions with regards to Service New South Wales cover check for seniors?
Sorry, the
and
what?
that I
I
think
just didn't hear
relates
the. Sorry, Mr. Mossman, I didn't hear the last part.
questions within seniors portfolio.
Yes.
Are you aware that many older people have reported that during COVID-19 they were unable to do their grocery shopping because the critical retail outlets they shop at do not have working scanners to read the QR card issued by Services New South Wales?
Yeah, thank you. I'll, and I think we may have,
Maybe Ms. Smythe might answer it.
yeah, Ms. Smythe here to assist. I know that with the seniors card, we have an enormous database which we were able to utilise during that time that you importantly refer to and identify our seniors and get that information out to them, part of our engagement and communication with them. And I think it was important that we did so. But I would just say before Ms. Smythe adds this, that the Service New South Wales app and QR codes, again, falls within Minister Dominello's portfolio. And while we do advocate through our seniors card and our database, the rollout of that, those mechanisms at supermarkets does fall within the remit of Service New South Wales. But I'd be happy to take the question to Minister Dominello if it assists.
And does Ms. Smythe have anything to add on this?
So we were aware of the issue and we did raise it with Service New South Wales. We were advised that businesses, there has been a lot of promotion about the card to businesses, but there's also the option for businesses to use like manual reporting when the card hasn't scanned correctly or they weren't able to scan it, so they can just do that manually on an iPad that the business owner holds.
Elderly people had issues not only with the QR code, but some thought that some were anecdotally were actually taking photos of the QR code as opposed to scanning. Is that right? Was that
Not just old people.
Yeah, that's right. Lots of people at the commencement thought that you took a photo of the QR code rather than understanding that the camera scanned it.
So has that been fixed now? The issue of the code card issued by the Services in New South Wales?
We'll take that to Minister Dominello, if I may, Mr. Mossane, because the rollout of that certainly was something that we would be pleased to assist. But all of this, I would say, is within Mr. Dominello's portfolio.
But just on that one, do we know what was the average waiting time for people to receive the card after they've requested it? Do you know how long it took for elderly to receive the card when they requested it? Are you aware?
Do you mean from the time they applied
for it?
For the card?
Yeah.
I'll hand that to Ms. Smythe. I'm not sure if Ms. Smythe, you might be able to assist.
I know that they could be downloaded instantly, so lots of people had family and friends print those out for them and give them to them, I believe. But I'd have to take that on notice around if they were mailed out, how long that took.
Yes, thank you so much. Minister, I might move on to mandatory minimum building standards. That's within your, in terms of the housing appropriate for seniors?
I don't think so, but I'm happy to hear the question and help if I can. I don't think we have,
Well,
but go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and we'll work out
It's about what
if it is.
It's about what input you've had into a housing state environmental planning policy with regards to seniors' appropriate housing.
Sure, Tanya might be able to assist with that, I think, on the seniors housing. Tanya?
Ms. Smythe?
Are you referring to the National Construction Code?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't fall into, it falls outside of the minister's portfolio, but she has been made aware of the advocacy within the sector.
I might assist just by saying that I have 4 peak bodies that I engage with regularly, and they very often, they're very strong advocates for these issues, so they would necessarily take those. I'm very happy to assist them and also advocate, but they generally do take care of that directly. So among those, I'm sure that they've advocated, and Tanya and I engage with them regularly where we hear about that. So that's why we're aware of it, but we're not actually responsible for it, but we do pass on their comments about the importance of it going forward.
The reason I ask is that because the National Seniors Australia put out a press release describing a big win after a national meeting of Commonwealth and state and territory building ministers agreed to mandatory accessible standards.
Yeah, which
but
is
not
fantastic.
New South Wales.
Okay, well, we'll take that on note. Sorry, what is the question, though?
Yeah, and so why not? If you were involved in the discussions, you just need to understand why was New South Wales not part of the National Construction Code, not accepting it.
Well, we do engage. I can assure you of that. We do that through those stakeholder bodies, but we also have our own senior strategy in New South Wales, which I've brought a copy of if you'd like to have a look at it. But we do have our own senior strategy in New South Wales to address those problems. While I'm not directly responsible for the building code, we have a way in which we talk about living well in age-friendly environments. And so specifically in the strategy we discuss those environments, the built environment, to be able to support our seniors. And we're working towards increasing our housing options for seniors so that we can address that. And for older people, those facilities should, of course, be age-appropriate. I have an elderly mother, as many of us do, and so, you know, I understand the challenges. It should also be affordable. That's one of the challenges that we have in building. It should be accessible, of course, close to transport and education and recreation and community services, so that we can provide all of those facilities around our seniors and those living well to support them to do so. So we do that through the strategy. So we do try and take a proactive approach to that in New South Wales and have advocated for that. We also have our Communities Plus building program, which is delivering 23,000 social housing premises and 500 affordable housing and 40,000 private dwellings over 10 years to our seniors.
Do you support adopting the new minimum accessibility standard, I should say?
Well, I wouldn't oppose it. I haven't seen it or had the opportunity to engage, but certainly that's exactly what we're doing, yes.
Certainly your government hasn't approved it.
I just think it's really important that we are supporting our seniors, and we're doing that not only through the strategy, but we also have a $1.1 billion social and affordable housing fund, which has delivered over 3,400 social and affordable housing dwellings throughout New South Wales over that will be rolled out over the next 4 years. So it's important to know that that is being worked on, and 40% of those dwellings will be targeted for tenants aged over 55 years. So some of us are not far.
Well, will they
from
have
that.
new minimum accessibility standards included in
I believe
those
so, yes.
40%?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. I'll move on to the elder abuse issues. How many calls have been taken by the Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline?
You'd have to direct that. He's independent. I'm happy to take that on notice and get that information. He does have an annual report, but I thank him for his work. And my understanding, Mr. Mosselmain, is that...
When you say he, who are you referring to?
The Commissioner.
The Commissioner.
Yeah, sorry. I thought you were referring to the Commission.
Yes, well, I'm referring to the Ageing and Disability Abuse Helpline. It's operated by the Commissioner.
Yes, yes.
I'm asking you how many calls have been made to the Commissioner with regards to Disability Abuse Helpline.
I can find that number for you. Can I just clarify in what period?
Sure.
What time?
It's just a general question.
If you need the number of calls, I'd need a period in which to provide them to you. But I can give you year on year if
within
that assists.
this budget year.
Sure, yeah, I might take that on notice to get the accurate number for you, but I would commend to you the annual report, and I would say that in addition to, of course, the Legislative Council's inquiry into this area, which I commend and support, the Commissioner does have details of that, and he is required to report that directly. So that's there, and I appreciate the great work that he has done. Sadly, those numbers do seem to be increasing. But he and I meet regularly and engage regularly to discuss that and how we might assist, and appreciative that the understanding and awareness of that helpline is rising, so that people are utilising it and reporting those incidents so we can get help.
Minister, the latest statistics from New South Wales Ageing and Disability Commission indicates that 77% of the almost 3,000 reports it received in 2020 about people who were subject to or at risk of abuse, neglect and exploitation related to older people. Most of them were women. What's your response? What action have you taken to address that?
It's a terrible, terrible indictment on our community. Absolutely appalling. As I said, an older mum myself. We have, and that's why we put in place a ageing and disability commissioner specifically, and I thank Mr Fitzgerald for the work that he's doing, because it's very important that we have someone specifically who is monitoring this and looking at it and taking action, which he is. He's very proactive. He and I speak very regularly to ensure that those reports are then dealt with, and I appreciate the work that he's done, and I commend it to the committee and his report.
Okay, we may take a break there for 15 minutes and come back.
Oh, really?
I know, it's disappointing for you, but since you're contributing so much.
I like
Thank
the
you.
free
All right, we'll get started again. Before we do, we finally got Ms McCannis connected through the telephone. So in case you get a question, we'll swear you now, if that's okay. Would you care to swear either an oath or the affirmation?
Thank you, and I do apologise. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you very much. Questions?
Thank you. Mr Jones, I just wanted to come back to this, to the National Redress Scheme. So, as I understand, you advised us that it was, sign-up was a condition for state sporting organisations. Can you advise what your compliance mechanism is for making sure that that's actually occurred? How does that actually work? How do you make sure that they've signed up and complied?
Oh, we actually check it. Absolutely, we do.
Right, and so all funded organisations have signed up. Is that your...
Only those that were required to do so, in terms of those that were actually identified through the Royal Commission process.
Right.
And then they were actually listed and named.
I see.
And those ones that are required to do so, yes.
Right, okay. All right, I just wanted to get some clarity on that. Can I ask now about the UCI Road World Championships?
Yes.
So can you explain what the Legacy Fund is, Minister?
Yeah, thank you. Another one of our very exciting projects, and thank you for your interest in it. One of the things we're very proud of is our 10 World Cups in 10 years and the large events, worldwide events, now that we're reopened, that we're attracting to New South Wales. But a part of that is also in terms of our commitment to hosting the UCI Road World Championships next year in 2022, is supporting our legacy program for the event, which is a $760,000 fund.
Where will it occur?
Sorry, after the 2022 UCI World Championships. So usually with these big events, you have legacy programs after.
Where is the UCI World Championships happening?
Oh, Wollongong.
In Wollongong, in the LGA of Wollongong, is that right?
Well, it's a long track, so I'll have to get details on where it starts and finishes. But it's it's in Wollongong.
Has the track actually been announced?
Not at this stage, not to my knowledge.
No, I think we're working with council, and UCI is working with council on that. It might have been, so I might take that on notice. But the local organising committee would make those arrangements together with council, and I think they're looking at that at the moment. But if I can just, if I may, I might just go back to your first question about the legacy program, just clarify on that. So that is called Ride Nation, and that's the Ride Nation pilot program, which is the legacy program supported by the pilot of Oz Cycling's Ride Nation in the 3 years. And I misspoke, I'm sorry, it's the 3 years leading into the event. And so that's an education program. A lot of them are after, but this one I understand is correctly beforehand, and it's delivered by Oz Cycling through schools and other organisations to promote participation in cycling. And delivery, of course, of that program was interrupted by COVID-19 and the pandemic, but that will continue to gain momentum in 2022 in the lead up to the event, and that's, I hope, will answer your question in that respect.
How many rounds? So has there been 2 rounds? Is that right?
I'm sorry, Ms Jones might want to add to that, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Minister. In addition to Ride Nation, there's also other legacy partnership programs, which I think is perhaps your next question. There's been 2 rounds so far. So those rounds, round 1, there was 6 successful applicants, which had a share of funding. Then in round 2, there was 8 successful applicants, which had share of funding as well. So that legacy program, we've already had 2 rounds. There's still a 3rd round to come. There's the UCI also Bike City designation, which is also a part of the legacy, where regions such as Bergen in Norway, there's also a town in the Netherlands, and Yorkshire in England, where they're actually officially named a bike city, and Wollongong will also achieve that name as well.
If I might just add, Mr. Adam, that's a $300,000 program over the 3 years to the grants, and so those we can let you know the details of those grants that have gone out already. So that
I've got the details of the grants.
Great. Good.
Yes. So I wanted to understand just your role. I mean, it's probably, I'm assuming the rounds actually were completed before your appointment as Minister.
Yes.
But perhaps Ms Jones could explain to me what role the Minister's office played in terms of the approval of the grants?
Look, I am happy to take that on notice, but typically with legacy programs, they are application based. Obviously, for legacy programs for a cycling event, we are targeting cycling organisations or cycling facilities. You would hope so, particularly since it's cycling legacy that we want to achieve. So they're application based. We receive those. They're actually assessed by an independent, or they're assessed by a panel, which has a variety of experts on them, as well as representatives from the Office of Sport, and also independent. From that assessment process, there are recommendations made, and then
To the Minister?
Those recommendations are then forwarded to the Minister for
Can I ask
consideration.
you, in round one, so of the 6 grants, 3 were conferred on organisations in the Kiama electorate, 2 in the Illawarra, and 1 to the Wollongong, 2 other areas in Illawarra and 1 to the Wollongong electorate. Was there any kind of ministerial involvement in?
Well, sorry, if I can just say, this is not part of my portfolio at this time. Very happy to take on notice.
It's not part of your
questions prior to
portfolio?
my time. Yep.
It's still
and
a matter for the office
And I'll
over
take that
which
on
you
notice
oversee,
as well.
surely,
I don't
Minister.
have. I'll take that on notice as well. I don't have all the briefing notes in front of me in relation to that. That
Well, obviously, there's a concern there. Obviously, you'd accept that there's been public debate about the disbursement of grants.
But what I will say is, when the
seems to
Office
be-
of Sport is assessing grant applications, that electorates are not taken into account. It's not a consideration.
Politics doesn't play any part.
Well, Wollongong isn't a Liberal party.
That's the point.
patch.
Kiama is. Well, Kiama
He's
sort of
independent.
is
He's
Liberal. I mean,
independent.
for the moment,
I
it's,
recognise your
its
cynicism.
status is a bit uncertain, but certainly when these grants were made, I think
Ryan Parker
the
was
electorate,
quite happy to see
the electorate was represented by the Liberals, and they got the balance. The majority, in fact, of the first round of funding seemed to have gone to the only Liberal electorate in the Wollongong region.
I'd
Do you
be
think that's
absolutely
unusual?
clear, Mr. Adam, that we do
I
not.
used to cycle down there.
Very unusual.
Past the blowhole.
I'm a dreadful cyclist, but a very enthusiastic
What
one. But can
blowhole?
I say,
At Kiama, it's just great. Yeah.
There's 2 there. Small one and the big one.
So, Minister, sorry, the Minister's trying to... Point of order.
Sorry.
You let the Minister finish.
I was just trying to pitch you on a bike, Mr. Khan. Can I say that in relation to any grants during my time, if there's any concerns in relation to those, I'd be very interested to hear those. Mr. Adam, if you're referring to grants before my time, I'm obviously not able to comment on those, but what I can say
You can give us an undertaking that you'll
I was
investigate.
trying to finish my
won't you?
sentence, if I may. What I can
go down and
say
see Gareth's
is that
blowhole.
Ms Jones has
Didn't know there
thorough
was
and
2 down there.
robust processes in place to deal with all grants projects, and we've given you an assurance today, and I can underline that they are not divided by electorate in any sense, and you can see that by these. They are sometimes divided by LGAs, for example, in the COVID crisis response, but certainly for these legacy grants, they're going to a BMX club, the Shoalhaven Cycling Prospectus, the City Council, the Cycle Club, the Council of Kiama, not the local member, for the pump track, for the youth there, and Cycling New South Wales.
Can I just then go to, I mean, obviously, the government's very attuned to integrity issues at the moment. Can I ask about the processes of within the Office of Sport around the assessment of business cases? Can you perhaps give us some details in relation to what processes are applied in terms of assessing business cases, Ms Jones?
Yes, through the Minister. Yes, so the Office of Sport, when we do receive applications with business cases, we go through those business cases as you would expect. So we have a look at them, we have a look for project detail, we have a look at QS reports, we have a look at project delivery schedules, and we weigh all of those up and then provide either recommendations or advice.
Do you prepare a benefit cost ratio?
No, we do not. That is not our role.
Who does that?
So the cost-benefit ratio is either submitted by the applicant, and it should be in line with Treasury guidelines.
Have you approved any projects through the Office of Sport with a cost-benefit ratio of less than 1?
I'll take that on notice.
Okay,
It might assist if we have a time
For all
period.
grants that you have to
It might assist if we could have a time period just for reasonableness. 'cause that
Sure.
could be
Over the
since-
past, let's say, the back to 2019.
Any sporting events in country areas, if you applied a CBR of 1, you'd have everything in Sydney and nothing in the bush.
Correct.
Minister, if I may, just
Perhaps the
to
guidelines
continue with
Can I just ask who the chair is in the absence of... Thank you, Chair, just so I know who to address.
Deputy.
Order.
Thank you.
That's right. We missed
I'm
that
now
little
chairing.
procedural.
Minister, I'll just ask
you,
you
Mr. Osman.
3 questions from the area of elder abuse.
If we left, we could shut this thing down.
Since 1 July 2019, I know you weren't a minister, but how many allegations of elder abuse have been reported to the Ageing and Disability Commission each year?
Thank you, Mr. Mossman, and it's an important issue that I think, given we have a Ageing and Disability Commissioner in place, is properly directed to him, so I'll take that on notice and direct that to him.
Yeah, thank you. A follow-up question. How many successful prosecutions have been undertaken in New South Wales for elder abuse-related crimes?
Again, I'll take that to him, but can I just ask for a time period again for reasonableness?
This is from 1 July 2019.
2019?
Yes.
Okay, well before my time, but yes, I'll take that to the Commissioner.
As I said, Minister, it's well before your time. Okay. Just going back to Multicultural New South Wales, with regards to COVID-19 funding grants. Multicultural New South Wales COVID-19 funding to community-based
Sorry, it's just a little bit
organisations.
difficult to hear you if you just could speak up. I just couldn't hear that.
I'm sorry. I want to ask questions in relation to the COVID-19 funding grants.
Yes.
What is the total sum of that commitment or funding from Multicultural New South Wales to all of those recipient groups? And I'll talk about the community-based organisations and charities.
The overall funding COVID support was $54.7 million, record funding to the community to respond to the Delta outbreak, but I might hand to Mr Laposta for further details of the breakdown on that.
Sure. Mr Mosman, there's been 4 times that we've gone back to ERC for funding, which started the first time was in June, obviously, when the pandemic started to really break out. So we've got a COVID response grant, which supported 152 grassroots organisations. Then we provided some emergency relief and NGO support to help asylum seekers, not a state government responsibility, but I'm very grateful for the state government to invest and to step into this space to help those people because, as a lot of us know, they were facing a lot of destitution, so I'm very grateful for that investment. That supported 6 organisations. Then there was some emergency relief and NGO support for a broader temporary visa category. Again, not the state government's responsibility, it's a Commonwealth responsibility, but very grateful that the state invested $5.5 million to support 14 NGOs to help in that space. Then, and it comes back to your theme earlier, it was really important that we continued to sustain and help the multicultural media agencies. A lot of them had lost significant levels of advertising revenue and those things from other sources. So critical, publications like the Greek Herald, Chinese Daily, so many of our small radio stations throughout Western Sydney, all of those things that the government stepped in to help them, and I'm very grateful for the Minister's leadership in that space and continued engagement. So we were able to support 74 organisations. Then there was some 74 media organisations? Yes, yep. And then through non-government organisation partnerships, particularly in the 12 LGAs of concern, we're able to support 99 NGOs to help in that space with things like food relief, emergency accommodation, emergency supplies, mental health. Yep. Then we had a... Mr Laposta, can you give us a breakdown, take it on notice, because a breakdown of how much was given to those 74 media outlets and the other organisations that you're... Yeah, so there's... certainly, because I'll be here a while. There's 630. Of course. Yeah, no. So the essence is there's 636 community NGO not-for-profit organisations that have received funding since the 16th of June across, I believe, up until this point, it's 8 different grant programs. But I'm happy to give you all of that on notice. Thank you. How was the funding determined? What criteria did you use? They're all different criteria. So some of it was very specific and nuanced to like grant programs, so community organisations being able to apply between $10,000 and $30,000 to help them. A really good example is a lot of the food relief and places like Addison Road that the Minister very recently visited to be able to, prepare food meals for people to be able to go out to Western Sydney. Wonderful organisations like Lighthouse Community Services out in Canterbury, Bankstown, some of our wonderful Sikh associations, Turbans for Australia, Amar Singh, these sorts of incredible grassroots organisations that were able to sort of sustain and continue their investment, but most importantly, their support to community. Sorry, Minister.
Can I just add to that, Mr. Musselman? It's really important. Can I thank the team at Multicultural New South Wales who worked so closely with the organisation so that we could understand directly what they needed to get that assistance out. And we heard very early on that temporary visa holders and asylum seekers were particularly vulnerable, and so we specifically targeted that group. As Mr. Laposta pointed out, it's not actually our remit, but we did it nonetheless because we heard from communities that we needed to support that quickly. We also supported grassroots community organisations because we know that they know their communities best. So this wasn't the type of response that was a one-size-fits-all. It was where those community organisations told us what they needed. In many cases, that was simply food hampers and to be able to get masks and PPE out to people, to be able to give information and get people to medical appointments, or to be able to assist.
Specific criteria to meet.
I know there's always criteria with every grant program, of course, yeah, absolutely. But what we tried to do was work with those communities quickly and directly to understand what they needed so that it wasn't just a blank check. Yeah. It was to help them do what they do best. But also in terms of the emergency relief, so we had the NGOs. We also worked with the councils directly and those in the former LGAs of concern to work with them closely and get to them as much as we can. But can I just say some of those grassroots community organisations, literally 152 of them, including Muslim Women of Australia, the Hindu Council, the Auburn Small Communities Association, and then the Empowering and Supporting Local Communities group. That first round provided $30,000 to 194 organisations, and the second round's open. But the Indian Crisis and Support Agency, Chester Hill Neighbourhood Centre, the Assyrian National Council, and Domestic Violence West. So really making sure we were getting into each of those niche groups to provide targeted, nuanced and tailored support to those communities.
You mind providing us with a list of the organisations and how much money they received and what criteria you used to allocate those fundings?
Minister, through you, if I can, all of the grant criteria on our website,
on
Mr.
website.
Mosselman, and we're talking about significantly different grants. So in terms of what we're allowed to provide you, I'm happy to take that on notice and give you
please.
Whatever that information is.
Yes, I'd appreciate that.
And just to be clear on the criteria, Mr. Mosselman, they are advertised on Multicultural New South Wales website. They're very clear.
Right. If I was, just to make sure I was, remember what you said, right, it's $50.7 million?
54.7
million. How much of that has been spent, Minister?
I'll have to take that on notice, but I hope all of it.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Mr. Mosselman. I think, and again, I'm happy to take the specifics on notice, but if you said roughly between 75 to 80%, I think it's really important for this group, and it was one of the reasons that I was so passionate before, so I apologise, Mr. Mosselman, for my passion. You know it only comes from a good place. But the pandemic's not over. So right now we are, we've got interpreters in places like Albury. We've got some challenges in areas like Kempsey and Moree and these sorts of places. So it's critical that we can sustain this energy. It's not just because it's not in Western Sydney that it's not a problem. So right now we're working with groups right on the ground to support the Congolese community in places like Albury, making sure there's translators, interpreters, all the services they need. So as an estimate, I would say it's between 75 and 80, but I'll take it on notice and I'll give you the specifics.
But Mr. Laposta makes a good point that it is ongoing, so the work hasn't finished and that those programs are available and literally flying out the 2 interpreters this week to respond to those is an ongoing task for us, which we're very mindful of.
Of those 75-80% that had been spent, how much of that, if you can take that on notice as well, how much of that was spent in the 12 LGAs, the areas of concern?
We'll do what we can to get that response to you, but can I say there was also a specific grant for those 12 LGAs of concern, former LGAs of concern, so that was also its own grant program. It might be that some of those organisations were in those LGAs, so I'm just flagging, we'll get to you the information we can, but it might be difficult to break those down because there was that one program that targeted the specific LGAs, but also some of those grassroots organisations were within them. So, but Mr.
Mosselman, it would be fair to say the majority of funding went to those 12 LGAs, and the reason was because that's where the majority of cases were, sadly. So, and when I asked my team for a breakdown across the LGAs, it was really pleasing to see that there was a distribution across all of the 12 LGAs. I am pleased to say, though, that Fairfield, Liverpool, Canterbury, Bankstown were the three highest, and that's because they were locked down the longest.
And I think it was 13 million on the LGA's specific fund to get to them.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can you guarantee that the COVID-19 support funds will not impact future funding that would ordinarily be available through Multicultural New South Wales?
Sorry, could you say the first part
But
again?
in other words, the money that's been spent now will not be taken out of the general funding that would usually go to Multicultural New South Wales.
I'll have to take that on notice. I'm not sure about future. I'm not sure I can comment on future expenditure. It's not the intent, but I'd have to take that on notice or, given it's all new funding.
She ain't the treasurer.
No, and it's also new funding, Mr.
But
Musselman.
obviously, as the minister, she'll make sure that they
I'm sure she'll
receive the
fight as hard
Multicultural New
as she
South
can,
Wales.
but she ain't the treasurer.
Yeah. So, Mr. Musselman, can I just be clear, though, in Multicultural New South Wales, I think finally the rest of New South Wales realises and appreciates the importance of this agency and how hard it's worked because the 2020-21 overall budget for Multicultural New South Wales was in the vicinity of $38.1 million. Now, in 21-22, the overall budget is $106.5. So you can see the very stark increase in the overall budget for Multicultural New South Wales, which has been prioritised under this government. That's an increase of $68.4 million. So I think those numbers speak clearly for our intention and the great work that has been done by the agency, and I thank everybody there for the incredible work that they did because I know it was a 24/7 job, and having the agency in place with those close ties to the community was incredibly important so we could get that out quickly.
Thank you, Minister. The following question relates to New South Wales Police and Multicultural New South Wales. How closely did Multicultural New South Wales and New South Wales Police work together on engagement with multicultural communities during the lockdown?
Yeah, thank you. It was pleasing for me that I could hold a weekly multicultural media press conference and engage, in addition to the specific forums that we held, with non-government organisations, community leaders, religious leaders, and in addition to our daily dialogue with those organisations. I was assisted by Assistant Commissioner Tony Cook, and he is responsible for the area in addition to South Western Sydney Area Health and Dr. Jan Fazell. So we held that engagement regularly, and those forums, they attended each of those to directly answer questions from the community, and that we had a Q&A session at each of those where they could ask live questions, and Tony Cook answered those and I was available. So we held those consistently throughout the time, and we've worked very closely with police, specifically in the area. And I just want to thank their multicultural liaison officers who also went out with police on the ground to ensure that we were really engaging with the community, and they're well equipped, as they do. The job that they do is fantastic, and they were well equipped to go out with police on the ground and assist too.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can I just ask questions with regards to, and maybe Joseph can take it on, answer this question, with regards to regional advisory councils. What role do they play? Are they funded? And what role do they play in Multicultural New South Wales?
Do you mean through the board? I might ask Mr. Laposta to speak to
You've got regional New South Wales.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Oh, look, thanks.
They feed through the board.
Thanks, Mr. Mosselman. To be fair, I was hoping in the first half of last year and the back half of last year to have a whole new plan together for our regional advisory councils so that I could get the minister to announce it, but we've been reasonably busy navigating COVID. So what that meant was that we maintained our existing regional advisory council network, which is across the 12 different regional areas of New South Wales. Up until we made those forums virtual, we certainly paid people for their time, Mr. Mosselman. So they are appointed officials onto those regional advisory councils, and it's a mix of community leaders from those various different regions, and also, the local police area commander, the local health director, all different players that can then make sure that government and the multicultural communities from those regions are connected. So the regional advisory councils, whilst they haven't been physical for the past 18 months, they have been virtual, and we've been seeking their counsel and advice on matters pertaining to COVID particularly, for obvious reasons, but then also any challenges around social cohesion or other issues that they may have faced. And in more recent times, particularly with the, the very sad story in terms of what's happened in Afghanistan and a number of those Afghans now moving to New South Wales, we've relied heavily on those networks in Sydney, but also in places like Newcastle, down in Wollongong, and then also in the Wagga-Albury region as well.
And if I might just add to that, Mr Mossman, thank you for the question, because it's a really important part of our engagement, and I appreciate your recognition and interest in it, because that gives us an opportunity to engage in those communities across New South Wales on issues directly affecting them and cultural diversity in their area. And we aim to enhance social cohesion and be a voice for community harmony through those groups. And it's a very specific task they have, and they do it very well. So they build that interfaith harmony, and they, the forum that they provide is critical to us to be able to understand and get that feedback on the ground. I just want to thank Multicultural New South Wales, because prior to COVID, over the past 4 years, they've held more than 200 regional advisory council meetings and engaged more than 250 regional advisory council members. So I just want to acknowledge and thank each of those members.
Is Griffith one of those 200?
It's a part of the Riverina. So Griffith, Wagga, Narrandera, and Leeton.
The reason I ask is that Murray is my duty electorate. And in any event, I meet up when I go with the president of the Multicultural Council of Griffith.
Carmel?
Carmel.
LaRocca.
LaRocca. And she does complain that she has written many times to Multicultural New South Wales, and in fact, I'll read you what she says. We have highlighted these many issues with Multicultural New South Wales several times. However, nothing have come of it to date. We'll, and she says she's a pretty active.
She is
citizen,
certainly. Yep.
Being the president of Multicultural Council of Griffith.
Yep.
And since the 90s.
Yep.
And they receive very little help.
Yep.
And have a growing multicultural community in Griffith.
Yeah.
So they don't. She uses her own facility, her own office.
Yep.
As a community space.
Yep.
Isn't it time for Multicultural New South Wales and the government to address that shortage, given the growth of multicultural communities happening in the Riverina area?
Yeah, Mr. Mossman, there's multicultural communities growing right across the state, and I would love for every one of our communities to have an office or a designated location. I think, can I speak to the Minister? Absolutely. I think I have pestered the Minister beyond belief in the last 4 months, and I'm not sure how she's had time to do anything other than talk to me and help with multicultural communities. So I'm very grateful to Ms Jones and my other colleagues probably for their patience. Can I just say, Mr Mossman, I echo your sentiments about Carmel LaRocca. She's a wonderful advocate for that community and the Riverina community. I think that there is absolute merit to creating community hubs and physical spaces for these various different organisations to survive and ultimately thrive. I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the Ethnic Communities Council, of which, say, Wagga has an Ethnic Communities Council, because they're part of, obviously, the federated model through FECA and then ECC New South Wales and then the local organisations, and the role of our agency at Multicultural New South Wales. But I can assure you that I've spoken to Carmel LaRocca recently. My staff have just texted me and also assured me that they've spoken to Carmel LaRocca very recently, and the Minister mentioned Jan Fazell the other day. There was only a forum a couple of weeks ago where she was asking specific questions around the nuancing for the mobility of fruit pickers and others in the regions to be able to still continue to do their work, with some challenges around isolation and access to pay and JobKeeper and JobSeeker and these things as well. So echo your sentiments. She's a very respected leader, and also happy to, take away from this meeting a focus and potentially, as soon as I can, a visit down to Griffith.
Well, out of the 106 million, Minister, that you've indicated it'd be, that Multicultural New South Wales has, how much of that will be spent in the regional areas on multicultural communities?
In what context, over what time, Mr Mossman?
Well, no, how much will be spent? I mean, has anything been spent on...
That's the annual budget for the agency.
Yes, has anything been spent in the last 6 months in regional New South Wales?
Yeah, we'll take that on notice and get the specifics to you. But in relation to those specific concerns, can I just loop back on that? None have been raised with me, but I'm very happy to deal with those specifically, and I just want to give you that assurance.
And as Mr. Laposta said, that there is a real growth of multicultural communities.
Yeah, and we encourage that.
So
yeah, absolutely.
we hope that more of that money is spent
Yep.
spent there as well. Minister, the New South Wales government announced on Tuesday, maybe that's not in your area, but I'll put the question in any event. The New South Wales government announced on Tuesday, the 7th of September 2021, following a palm tree inquiry, that it will outlaw religious discrimination and amend the Anti-Discrimination Act by making discrimination on the grounds of religion unlawful. But it will wait until the Morrison government introduces and passes a new religious discrimination bill before deciding to change the laws. Why the delays, Minister?
Thank you. It's an important issue which I know and I appreciate your interest in. That anti-discrimination, if you're referring to Mr. Lynch's bill, is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm aware that it was introduced. Obviously, it's a matter for the Attorney-General in relation to that. But can I say, as a Minister responsible for the Multicultural New South Wales Act, I'm very proud that for 40 years the New South Wales Parliament has recognised that the people of New South Wales are of different religious backgrounds, who are free to profess, practice and maintain their own religious heritage within the context of the rule of law and a democratic framework, which is extremely important. And while respecting and making provision for religious diversity, multiculturalism only works if we share our unified commitment to the common values and things that bind us together as Australians. We have the most harmonious multicultural community, and we are world leading in that respect, and we can see it in this room. It's wonderful. But the proposed amendment relates to anti-discrimination laws. As far as it refers to those specifically, I'd refer that to the Attorney-General because his agency, Anti-Discrimination New South Wales, is responsible for that. But I'm aware that at the moment religion is not currently a ground for complaint under the New South Wales anti-vilification laws, and it's been raised as a possible gap in our protections for faith communities.
The reason I raise it, Minister, is the fact that not only is it of significant concern to people who have been under the hammer because of their religious background, been abused, and I mean the Islamophobia list tells you the significance of the abuse that they've suffered. But this particular issue had been through an expert panel report, which approved it three years ago. So this is further delay. I mean, the new government might come in maybe another 6 months or a year, and it further delays the adoption of this very, very important amendment to the law.
Yeah.
Why not adopt it, given that there's there's across-the-board support by the government, the opposition, and the crossbench? Why not adopt that and when there's absolute support for it?
Yeah, thank you. Can I say a number of things in relation to that, because it's important? Of course, we have the Anti-Discrimination Board in New South Wales, and that receives and handles complaints regarding racial discrimination and vilification, and questions about complaints in relation to that or in relation to that specific legislation should be referred to the Attorney-General, and I'm happy to refer those to him, but I would say that it's not within my remit. But we do have in place this government introduced religion as a ground under the Section 93Z of the Crimes Act amendment, which we were both in the chamber for, which replaced that serious racial vilification provision in the Anti-Discrimination Act and provided stronger protections, which we were all supportive of, by making it a criminal offence to publicly threaten or incite violence on the basis of religion, and we're very proud of that going through. And that was introduced following that concerted effort, if you might recall, by the Keep New South Wales Coalition, and I just thank them for their extraordinary work in that space.
But will you commit to speaking to the Attorney to try and bring it forward, rather than wait for the Morrison government to adopt it, which may never do?
Well, Mr. Mossman, it's not my it's not my area. I'm happy to speak to the Attorney-General about it, but you should direct your questions to him properly.
Thank you.
Minister, I want to turn to veterans issues. Can I ask firstly about whether the New South Wales government was consulted by the Commonwealth in relation to the terms of reference for the Royal Commission for Defence and Veterans Suicide.
Yes.
You were consulted.
Yes. In fact, I think we were the leading, and Ms McInnes might like to speak more to that because I think that was prior to my time, but certainly we were one of the leading states to sign up to it. But Ms McInnes, you might like to speak more to the consultation process that occurred. But certainly we led the call for the commission to happen, Mr Dowden.
Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for the question. Yes, the New South Wales Government was consulted. There was broad consultation on the terms of reference. There are a number of forums that we participate in. The Ministry is part of a Ministerial Wellbeing Task Force. The Office for Veterans Affairs is part of the Commonwealth State and Territory Committee. We have established a whole of government working group. We have written to the Crown Solicitor's Office to instruct them to support the New South Wales Government in any responses to the Royal Commission. We have been invited to participate as part of the Commonwealth Attorney General's group that will be working together to support the Royal Commission. And above everything, we are very committed to working together to build on the work that the New South Wales Government has done with its veterans strategy and all the important things we've put in place in New South Wales to support veterans.
Yeah, and I have a copy of that here. If I can just add, thank you for your interest, Mr Adam, because it is important. We did lead the call for that in response to that consultation. It was important that we established that, and it was one of the first things we did. The letters patent were issued first by us.
New South Wales made a submission in relation to the terms of reference. In terms of, there was kind of a written proposition put to the Commonwealth.
That would have been prior to my time, but I'm happy to take that on notice, or Ms McInnes may be able to answer that for you now.
Thank you. Yes, we did do a response in support of the draft terms of reference. They were shared internally with key stakeholders in New South Wales Government, and we were generally in support of those terms of reference. And yes, the New South Wales Government has endorsed and issued letters patent for New South Wales to participate in the Royal Commission.
I see. And what's the status of preparation of New South Wales' submission to the Royal Commission?
I may have to take that on notice. It's in process. It's not finalised to the best of my knowledge, but I'll take that on notice. But my understanding as at now is where it's in process.
Does the New South Wales Government have any data on the number of veteran suicides in New South Wales?
Yes, Ms McInnes, you might like to speak to that specifically.
Yes, thank you, Minister. The data that is collected on veteran suicide has been collected at a national level. The Commonwealth had commissioned the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare to look at the data and have confirmed recently that between 2001 and 2019, sadly, there were 1,062 confirmed suicide deaths amongst former Defence Force personnel, and unfortunately there was a further 211 amongst serving personnel. That data is across the whole of Australia. We don't yet have that data specifically broken down to states and territories. We're working very closely with the Commonwealth and with the Coroner's Office to ensure that we are actively now looking at state data as well.
Minister, do you think the support for veterans' mental health is adequate in New South Wales? Is there more that can be done?
Mr Dadham, can I just place on record my sincere condolences for all the families. A single suicide is a tragedy, and it's extremely important that we wrap around those communities and prevent that happening. We can always do more. There is a dedicated Minister for Mental Health, but I can say to you that we take this very seriously within my remit and will continue to do so because it's extremely important that we make sure we're putting in place everything we can as a government to support that. And we do that in a number of ways through the agency, and our strategy, which was the first of its kind, specifically is there to direct and address some of those issues. We also have a number of wellbeing centres on their way and one in place at Nowra. In addition to Concord Repat Hospital, we have a number of opportunities to improve on those. We always can, but we do have a number in place as at this time, and I'm always happy to be an advocate for more, given our push for the Royal Commission to understand better, but also to ensure that we're putting as much as we possibly can around those who have served their country for us to do the very best we can. So I'm very keen to take that up. I'm very proud of the work of Invictus Australia that wraps around our former veterans. In terms of mental health, it's $130 million to provide support and mental health services was on top of the $2.6 billion in the budget for mental health. So there is that specifically.
That's a New South Wales figure, is it?
Yes, New South Wales budget for mental health 21-22, 2.6. That's the largest investment in the state's history into mental health, so we're very proud to be a component part of that, but obviously it's the Premier's priority as well, which is the Towards Zero Suicide Premier's priority, which aims to reduce the number of suicides. Our framework for this, Mr Adam, is not just by portfolio or silo, it's a whole-of-government framework which sets out our priorities for our suicide prevention initiatives across government to address those priorities in the strategic framework and reduce that rate. I'm very proud of our veteran strategy, which prioritises the mental health of our veterans, and our approach working across government is to ensure that we are ensuring that the needs of New South Wales veterans are duly considered in all of our mental health initiatives.
Can I turn to the Veterans Employment Program? Ms McInnes might be able to tell me, answer this one. How many staff, full-time equivalent, are dedicated to overseeing the Veterans Employment Program?
In the New South Wales Office for Veterans Affairs, we have 12 staff, and those staff work very diligently to join the dots. I always say working with the Commonwealth, working with local government, working with ex-service organisations. A large part of our role through the veteran strategy has actually been to communicate to the veteran community about the services and programs that New South Wales
Ms.
government
McInnes,
offers.
can I bring you back to the question, which was specifically about the Veterans Employment Program? How many staff are dedicated to managing that program?
So again, that is a fantastic program, and I'm really proud that we won for a second time the Prime Minister's
I wasn't asking
award.
about the merits of the program.
There are only 2 staff in our office that look after that program, but it is a multiplier effect. So in effect, we have the whole of the public service that is supporting this program. We now have measures in place. The Public Service Commission has a question for every applicant into New South Wales Government that includes whether you have been a former Defence Force personnel. So we're collecting data actively. That then gets picked up in the PMES, which tracks veterans staying in the public service, how long they're staying, where they're moving, their satisfaction. We're developing mentoring programs in different parts of government. Different areas of the government have established networking and support programs for veterans. And at the heart of all of this is the Anzac Memorial, which employs a cohort of veterans that welcome a whole lot of different activities from the community and from New South Wales Government. I think I'm happy in saying that while we only have 2 staff, we have currently over 300 champions across New South Wales Government to support veterans finding employment in New South Wales Government.
Thank you.
That was an excellent answer.
She certainly covered a lot of territory beyond the original
Mr. Datum,
question.
if I could just add to that in terms of that program, just in terms of its target and effectiveness, that program aimed to employ 1,000 veterans in the public service by 2023. We have smashed that target and in fact doubled it. So we have 2,000 employed through that program. So I think those two staff have been extremely effective, and I want to thank them for the work that they've done, because we've also won awards with that. There's been, as at November, over 2,000 veterans, and it was the first of its kind in Australia, and other states have copied that program happily. So it also won the Public Sector Excellence in Supporting Veteran Employment category in the 2021 Prime Minister's Veteran Employment Award. So I think that speaks to the effectiveness of those two staff.
Thank you, Minister. Can I ask about the how many veterans are there in New South Wales?
At the moment, I do have that number. 2,000 employed. I'll just find that exact one for you. As at today, 200,000. 200,000. And how do you arrive at that figure? That is there's approximately 1,200 that are serving Australian Defence Force that separate each year, that transition into civilian life, and that's according to the advice that I have, including that the census results, which this year happily included a category for veterans, but we get that further data from them, and so the data is based on the ABS information. But Caroline, you might like to speak
ABS
to whether we can
assessment.
update that for you.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Yes, we know that around 1,200 ADF exit into New South Wales each year, and we've mapped and tracked as best we can by postcode where they exit into. We are looking forward to the census data, because for the first time it will give us a much clearer picture of where our veterans live across New South Wales, although we do know that there are clusters of veterans that do end up living near defence bases. So Nowra was chosen as the location for the first Commonwealth-funded Veteran Wellbeing Centre, because there is a large population of veterans that live in that region. We don't have all the data yet. There is a new data group that has been established through the Commonwealth State and Committee working group across the nation to look at how we can better inform our actions through the data that we all collect. So that is an active new group that is looking at better data to support our veterans.
New South Wales doesn't maintain its own database of veterans. It doesn't have...
Well, I would say
Is that correct?
Ms McInnes might speak to what we do in the space, but it's obviously a Commonwealth issue. What we do is, as best we can through the Office of Veterans Affairs, use that census data to allow us to target better the programs that we have in place and our support services. But Ms McInnes, you might like to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Minister. We're collecting all sorts of data. I think it's fair to say that this area of work by states and territories really only gained momentum during the centenary of Anzac. So prior to establishing the Veterans Employment Program, we actually had no data on the landscape of veterans living in New South Wales and no data on veterans employed in New South Wales Government. So we've come an awfully long way. There are various sources of data at the moment. So there is a Commonwealth State agreement for health services provided to veterans. And historically, even the Department of Veterans Affairs did not have data for all former defence personnel, because largely veterans went into new fields and occupations, and they were only captured if they then needed the support of DVA. So that historically there is a very large gap in data that exists for veterans, but it is improving all the time, and part of the data group is to actually share what we've done and gather more data. So the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare is in that group. So the data that they've been working on across the nation, they're looking at de-aggregating and giving us better data for each of the states and territories as well. So we are actively working in this space.
Can I ask, Minister, what initiatives is the New South Wales Government taking to monitor the number of veterans who are either homeless or at risk of homelessness?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Adam. It's an excellent question and one that's very important. We are committed to supporting the health and wellbeing of our veterans in New South Wales, and that's why we created the strategy to ensure that we were supporting our veteran community in doing that. And we know that we need to make life easier for our veterans who are experiencing homelessness or are at risk of homelessness due to those having served and the access to the services that they need. We help people into safe and stable housing and connect them with a range of support services to help prevent them and the former defence personnel and their families ending up in a situation of being homeless. In this respect, we provide a range of services, including Link to Home, which has a veterans specific Link to Home veterans program, and the ex-service information and referral service. That could include a range of services, not just homelessness. The Rent Choice Veterans, which is particularly targeted again at our veterans, and that provides private rental subsidy for eligible veterans and provides access to affordable housing in the private rental market. So they are information and referral services. They are supporting those individuals. They are contactable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We connect them to specialist housing services, and one of the range of rent choice products that we offer funds a housing project officer at RSL Defence Care, which is now part of RSL Life Care, to carry out that intake and referral service coordination and case management responsibility. So importantly, we've expanded the eligibility criteria to ensure that more veterans can utilise the service. And in July this year, RSL Life Care advised that they had assisted 35 households through the Rent Choice Veterans Program in the calendar year to date. But Ms McInnes, you might like to add to that.
All right.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just checking if
question,
I was going to run out of time, but I'm not. So
Wondered if Ms McInnes had anything to add to that in terms if I've missed anything on the programs.
No, Minister, that's, we work very closely with the ex-service organisations and I think one of the key things that we've done is build awareness of the work that New South Wales Government is doing and ensuring, so for example, we've built a portal on the New South Wales Service website, which is a veterans page, which points people to the services that we provide, and then we communicate all of this information regularly through our own newsletters and through RSL, War Widows, Lexi, all the ex-service organisations share our information about how to find our services.
Sorry, could I just add to that, Mr. Adam, very quickly? Just mindful, sorry, of the time. It's just important to fill that out because I just want to call out the Nowra Veteran Wellbeing Centre, which is doing a phenomenal job, and we're looking to expand those in partnership with the federal government because providing those centres is extremely important, and we're looking to support those going forward. And also, in one of the beautiful things about my portfolios is sometimes they dance together and we have a great synergy. And with sport and veteran sport, we're able to provide some of those opportunities through Veteran Sport Australia to assist the transition of our veterans and pathways forward through that and Invictus.
I want to turn to the strategy. It seems like a bit of a strange document. It doesn't have any measures or any actions. Where is the action plan and why isn't it published?
The action plan's here. I can provide you with a copy if you like.
Oh, doesn't appear to be on the website. Is the action plan been published on the website?
Caroline, would you like to? I'm happy to give you my copy, but Caroline
That'd be great.
can speak to that.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm struggling very hard to hear. I think the question was about the action plan. We are tracking all 57 actions very closely with our whole of government partners. We meet monthly with the Parliamentary Secretary, and I have also been updating the Minister when I meet with the Minister on key actions in the strategy. Of course, some have sadly been impacted by COVID, but mostly we've been able to, where it's not been possible within the timeframe, then move those actions back. The strategy is reportable also into Parliament, and at the we will be doing a report to the Minister and then at the 2-year mark into Parliament. I'm looking at Catherine Delia because I also report regularly into the Secretary's Board on progress of the strategy and action plan.
And can I say, Mr. Adam, it is available on the website.
The website?
Yep, if you look under Veterans Action Plan, it's the first item. If you Google Veterans Action Plan.
Okay, there you go. All right, that's it for me in terms of questions.
Sorry? Is that it?
That's it, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, may I just, through you, Mr. Chair, if I might just provide some answers to some earlier questions to assist the committee? I'm sorry, Mr. Khan, I apologise, but we do have some answers for the committee. In relation to NSWIS, you asked about the strength and conditioning program. I might get Ms. Jones to just provide that update. You asked about that, if you don't mind. Yeah, if you want to do that now.
To that one first. Thank you, Minister. I've actually received this advice from the New South Wales Institute of Sport. It is a requirement for all New South Wales Institute of Sport strength and conditioning staff to be accredited by the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association. A number of staff do have Exercise Sports Science Australia accreditation, however it is not compulsory. This aligns with the requirements of the Australian Institute of Sport.
So can you just clarify, the requirement is only for the strength and conditioning accreditation?
Correct.
Why is that?
If that's a question, I'll have to take that on notice.
I think that's because I think those staff also have Exercise Sports Science Australia accreditation, which should cover off more broadly than just the strength and conditioning. Those guys will make you work hard no matter what you do. Can I just give an answer to
before you proceed on to that, so I just want to clarify again in terms of the sports. So the sports scientists are not required to have accreditation.
The only answer I have so far is in relation to the strength and conditioning staff.
Which was in response to your answer, which we took on notice.
So I will ask again then, why are sports scientists not covered, given that the Australian Sports Commission commitment was for a national accreditation scheme to apply to both sports scientists and strength and conditioning?
Yes, so we'll follow up on that second part of that question for you.
But advised that this does align with the requirements of the Australian Institute of Sport. But we're happy to provide further information. Provide that further if you like.
Yes, please, thank you.
Just in relation to the UCI cycling 2022, you asked about legacy grants. I just wanted to clarify that they were not approved by a minister. They were approved by the local organising committee, those grants prior to my time.
Right, okay.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify, sorry, did you want to go ahead? That's okay. You go.
I've got a number of questions there, but I'll ask one. I know Trevor wants to go home.
I'm not going home.
And in regards to reducing social isolation for seniors grant program, in 2021, the New South Wales government awarded $600,000 in funding for projects to reduce social isolation for seniors.
Yep.
You can take this on notice. Can you provide us with
this is a DICSA, Mr. Mosselman.
Can you provide us with a breakdown on what organisations, what funding those organisations received, and how much each of those organisations were allocated?
Yeah, it's a fantastic program, and we've continued it this year. In fact, I asked to bring it forward this year, given the COVID pandemic. It wasn't due to be rolled out again until next year, but the $600,000 Reducing Social Isolation for Seniors program was launched in February 2021, and it's I think something that we can be very proud of, because we know that our seniors can be more vulnerable and subject to social isolation, and the rest of the population now I think understands a little bit of what that's like, given the public health orders. And so that program, totalling, as you quite rightly say, $600,000, was awarded to 26 local councils, not-for-profit organisations and community groups across New South Wales. The specific recipients are available on the website, Mr. Mosselman, and we can send you the link to that, and those funded projects are due for completion by June 2022. As I say, the next round is open, and we want to combat that through the next grants program round. There's a range of programs, rug making, dancing, a whole lot of online programs which you can see. Yeah, and I'm very proud of that program, because we know that combating social isolation for seniors is extremely important.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I just provide one more clarification, if I may, Mr. Mosman? You asked a question earlier and provided, an article, which we were asked to comment on. Can I just clarify that article and those quotes were in relation to North Melbourne housing towers, and so it wasn't something for which in New South Wales we were responsible for. Thank you.
Any more questions from government?
No, we're fine.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I'm struggling. No.
Oh, dear.
There's so
All
much
righty,
I
thank
could
you very
ask.
much, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all
officials.
showing up to the last
Thank you.
last
No, it's
afternoon. I'm
all
sure you've
good
all
fun.
had quite enough, so thank you. I appreciate your interest. Oh my goodness. Thank you for your questions. I appreciate
I
it.
note there are a number of questions taken on notice. The committee secretariat will be in contact with you soon. Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
good
you,
weekend.
Chair. Thank you,
Understood.
everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.